Well, we voted you don't get a say. That was my mother's answer when I came home from a double shift and demanded to know where my 7-year-old daughter was. Mia was gone, and my sister was already clearing out her bedroom for a new office. I was terrified, but I didn't scream. I opened one old legal folder instead. Why did all three of them suddenly go pale? At 11:03 that morning, I unlocked the front door wearing my scrubs. My hospital shoes were on. Faint red marks circled my wrists from gloves, and my head was full of monitor alarms and fluorescent lights. All I wanted was 2 hours of sleep, maybe 3. Then I wanted Mia beside me on the couch, asking for snacks and talking through a cartoon she had seen 100 times. Instead, the house was busy. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway. A ring light leaned against the wall. Shelving sat beside a white desk inside its box. Chelsea was walking around in socks with a measuring tape. She looked up and said, "Oh, you're home." Not "Hey, Nat," not "How was your shift?" Just that. The voice of someone caught doing something I was never supposed to see. I walked past her and went straight to Mia's room. The bed was stripped. Her drawings were gone. The rug was rolled halfway across the floor. Her stuffed rabbit sat on the dresser facing the wall, as if even it had been told not to look. Mia? Nothing. Her backpack was gone. Her jacket was gone. Her sneakers were gone. I stepped back into the hallway. "Where is my daughter?" Mom came out of the kitchen. Dad stood behind her. Chelsea stared at the floor. Mom folded her arms. "We voted. You don't get a say." I stared at her. "You voted." About my child? She told me I worked too much. Mia needed a more stable environment. They had taken her to Ethan's family because someone had to make the decision. Then Chelsea said she needed the room for work. It has the best light in the house. That was when disbelief turned cold. They had discussed my daughter's future while I was at the hospital caring for strangers. There is something especially cruel about being punished for working by people whose roof your work helped keep over their heads. I went into the bathroom. I did not slam the door. I did not yell. I washed my hands once, then again. I looked into the mirror and realized I was doing what I had done my whole life, staying calm so everyone else could stay comfortable. This time, I was calm for a different reason. I went to my bedroom, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out an old legal folder. When I returned, Chelsea looked at it. "What's that?" I did not answer. I looked at my mother, my father, and my sister. "You have 30 days to leave." Mom went still. Dad looked at the folder. Chelsea lost what little color she had left. They thought they had made a decision for me. They had no idea what decision they had just forced me to make. "This is our house," Mom snapped. Her voice came fast, almost offended, as if I had forgotten something obvious. I looked down at the legal folder in my hand. That sentence took me somewhere else. Not to the closing table. Not yet. Further back. Chelsea and I had always been given different roles in our family. She was creative. Sensitive. The kind of person who needed encouragement. I was mature. Sensible. The one who could handle things. When Chelsea made a mistake, Mom usually said, "She's still figuring things out." When I got frustrated about cleaning up the mistake, Dad would tell me, "You know better." For a long time, I thought that meant they trusted me more. Looking back, I think it mostly meant they expected more from me and asked less about what it cost. One Thanksgiving, when we were teenagers, Chelsea forgot the pie she had promised to bring to my aunt's house. We were already halfway there when she remembered. Mom turned the car around. Nobody complained. Nobody told Chelsea she should have planned better. A few months later, I missed an after-school meeting because my parents needed me home to watch her. Dad thanked me afterward. "We knew we could count on you." I remember feeling proud. That is the strange thing about being the dependable child. You can mistake being needed for being valued. There was no dramatic cruelty in our house. No slammed doors every night. No speeches about who mattered more. It was quieter than that. Chelsea was allowed to need people. I was expected to be the person people needed. For years, I thought being the dependable daughter was a compliment. It took me much longer to understand that sometimes dependable is the word people use when they have stopped asking whether you're tired. Maybe that is part of why I became a nurse. Hospitals had rules. If a blood pressure was too low, it was too low. If a lab result was wrong, someone dealt with it. Nobody looked at a dangerous number and said, "Don't be dramatic. That's just how your family is." I liked that. Problems had names. There were steps. There were limits. At work, I could make hard decisions without apologizing for making them. At home, I spent years using that strength for everyone except myself. Then I had a daughter of my own, and for the first time, being dependable wasn't a role someone had assigned me. It mattered. Mia depended on me because she was a child, because I was her mother. And after she came into my life, the weakest parts of my family began showing themselves in ways I could no longer explain away. Ethan was never cruel in the dramatic way people expect when they hear about a man who walked away from fatherhood. He did not shout. He did not threaten me. He simply became distant. When I told him I was pregnant, he sat there for a long time before saying, "I never pictured myself with kids." That was all. There was something painful about how ordinary the sentence sounded, like he was explaining why he did not want a certain kind of furniture. After Mia was born, Ethan came to the hospital. He held her once. Someone took a picture. For a little while, I told myself that maybe seeing her would change something in him. It did not. He slowly disappeared from every part of parenting that could not be captured in a photograph. He was not there for fevers at 2 in the morning. He did not fill out school forms. He did not sit beside Mia at the dentist. He did not do daycare pickup, bedtime, or the mornings when she cried because she could not find the right shoes. He showed up a few times a year, just often enough for people to say, "But he's still her father." Biologically, yes. In every practical way that mattered, I was raising Mia alone. And because Ethan never fought me for anything, I never pushed for a formal custody arrangement. At the time, that seemed reasonable. Why create a legal fight with a man who was not asking for more time? I thought his lack of interest was a kind of safety. Looking back, that was one of my biggest mistakes. Absence can feel harmless when nobody is challenging you, but an empty space is still a space someone else can step into. I did not understand then that having no conflict was not the same thing as having protection. My solution to most problems was simple. If everyone left me alone, I would handle it. That worked for a while. By the time Mia was old enough for school, I had a nursing job with a schedule I could manage. The money was tight, but I could make pickup. I could be home for dinner. I knew where my daughter was every night. Then the hospital offered me a better position, better pay, better benefits, a real path forward. The problem was the schedule, longer shifts, some doubles. My first instinct was to turn it down. Then my parents surprised me. "Take it," Mom said. "Move back home. We'll help with Mia." Dad agreed. For the first time in years, I let myself think maybe they really did want to help me. Because what I didn't know then was that their sudden generosity had almost nothing to do with me or Mia. Their sudden generosity made sense 2 weeks later when my mother asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. That table had been in the house since I was a kid. We had eaten birthday cake there, folded laundry there, and argued over homework there. That night, it was covered in bills. Mom pushed a stack toward me, and told me they were in trouble. Not a little behind. In trouble. Between credit cards, personal loans, and other unsecured debt, they owed close to $68,000. They were also more than $19,000 behind on the mortgage and property taxes. Their credit had taken too many hits. A normal refinance was no longer simple. Mine was different. I had steady employment, good credit, and a clean payment history. Suddenly, the new nursing position made even more sense. They did not only need me earning more, they needed my name. I remember Dad rubbing both hands over his face before telling me they could lose the house. Mom reached across the table. We just need help getting through this. The plan was not hidden from me. I met with the lender. I sat through the closing process. I saw the documents. I understood that my name would be on the deed and that the new mortgage obligation would be mine. Nothing about that was mysterious. What made it easier to accept was the way my parents described it. Temporary, just on paper. The family home would still be the family home. I put about $24,000 of my savings into the arrears, closing costs, and the other expenses needed to finish the transaction. After that, the monthly mortgage became my responsibility. Dad looked at me across that same kitchen table and said, "You're saving the family home." Mom squeezed my hand. "We'll never forget this." Chelsea shrugged and said, "It's just paperwork anyway." I remember looking at her and thinking that paperwork has a funny way of becoming important only after somebody wants to ignore it. My parents had bought the house years earlier. They had raised us there. Emotionally, they still considered it theirs. I understood that. But they also wanted me to carry the debt, the credit risk, and the monthly payment while they kept the authority that came with calling it their house. I was not fooled because I was stupid. I saw the risk. I simply believed people would treat someone kindly after she helped save the place they loved most. For a while, they did. Mom picked Mia up when I worked late. Dad made pancakes on Saturday mornings. Even Chelsea sometimes sat on the floor and colored with her. I remember thinking, maybe this is what support is supposed to feel like. Then the paperwork was finished. The house was safe, and almost immediately, the way they spoke to me began to change. The first few months were almost good enough to make me embarrassed for ever doubting them. Then the little comments started. Mom would look at the clock when I came home and ask, "Another double?" Dad would shake his head and say, "Kids need their mothers around." I reminded them that they were the ones who had pushed me to take the position. Mom always had an answer. "That doesn't mean we expected this." This nothing she said sounded cruel enough to start a fight over. That was part of the problem. So I adjusted. I picked up more groceries. I left meals ready. I made sure Mia's school things were organized before every shift. I kept telling myself Mom was tired, Dad was getting older, Chelsea was trying to build something of her own. I was still doing what I had always done, finding reasons for everybody else. Chelsea's online home decor business started small. A few boxes in the garage, then a shelf in the hallway. Then a ring light appeared beside the dining room table. Soon, shipping supplies were stacked near the stairs, and she complained whenever Mia walked through while she was filming. One afternoon, Chelsea stood in Mia's doorway and looked toward the window. Her room gets the best afternoon light. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She did not laugh with me. Mia noticed too. One night, while I was helping her get ready for bed, she asked, "Does Aunt Chelsea not like when I'm home?" I felt something tighten in my chest, but I smiled. "She's just busy." I meant to reassure her. Looking back, I think I was really reassuring myself. Adults like to believe children do not notice tension until someone raises their voice. That is not true. Children notice who sighs when they enter a room. They notice whose things are always being moved. They notice when adults talk about space as if the child occupying it is the problem. 2 weeks before the morning I came home to that empty room, Chelsea asked something that sounded casual. If Mia stayed with Ethan some weekends, wouldn't that be better for everybody? I looked at her. Ethan doesn't parent, Mom answered before Chelsea could. He's still her father. For the first time, the conversation felt different. They were not complaining anymore. They were testing how I would react to an idea they had already started taking seriously. I should have taken that conversation more seriously, because while I was working my next double shift, somebody in that house stopped discussing my daughter and started making arrangements. Mom was still talking after I told them they had 30 days to leave. You can't evict us from our own home. Dad stepped forward. Don't threaten your mother. Chelsea looked at the folder in my hand. Can she actually do that? I did not answer any of them. My daughter was still gone. That mattered more than watching 3 adults panic over consequences they had never expected to face. I went back into Mia's room. Her backpack was missing, so was her jacket. There was no medication to worry about, but I checked the dresser anyway, looking for anything that might tell me where she had been taken. That was when I saw the paper on her desk. Studio setup Saturday. Underneath were notes for a desk, backdrop, shelves, lighting, and a filming corner. A receipt was clipped to it. I checked the date. 3 days earlier. They had bought things for Mia's room before I ever came home from that shift. Before the so-called vote. Before anyone bothered telling me my daughter was going anywhere. People reveal priorities in what they prepare for. They had prepared more carefully for Chelsea's lighting than for what being removed from her home might do to my daughter. I took pictures of everything. The plan, the receipt, the empty walls. Then I photographed my call log and walked out to my car. I called Ethan. Voicemail. I called again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. One thought kept circling in my head. If Ethan had Mia, why was he not answering? Then I remembered Janet. Ethan's mother and I had never been close, but she always answered her phone. She picked up after the second ring. Is Mia with you? There was a pause. She's here. Relief hit me so fast I had to grip the steering wheel. Then Janet added, and she's staying here. My relief disappeared. What did my mother tell you? Janet said Mom had told her I finally admitted I could not handle Mia with my schedule. She said I wanted Ethan's family to take over for a while. That was when I understood. Mom had not only lied to me, she had built a separate story for them. I'm coming, I said. Janet answered, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking. I drove carefully. I kept both hands on the wheel. I watched my speed. I forced myself not to imagine every possible disaster. When I reached Janet and Michael's house, Janet opened the door only a few inches. Where's my daughter? She's safe. That's not what I asked. Michael appeared behind her. Then I saw Mia at the kitchen table. Her stuffed rabbit was in her lap. Her shoulders were pulled inward. Mia? She looked up at me. She did not run. She did not smile. She only stared, like she was trying to decide whether I had really come to take her home. That was the moment I knew someone hadn't just taken my daughter out of my house. Someone had put something inside her head before they did it. I stepped inside and lowered myself until I was level with Mia. Hi, sweetheart. She kept both hands around her stuffed rabbit. Can I hug you? Mia looked at me for a few seconds. Then she whispered, Grandma said you needed a break from me. My stomach dropped. She twisted one of the rabbit's ears between 2 fingers, the way she always did when she was scared. Aunt Chelsea said I make too much noise. Then she looked down. Was I bad? That question hurt more than anything my family had said to me. No, I told her. You weren't bad. The adults made a bad decision. I moved a little closer. I never asked anyone to take you away from me. Mia finally looked into my eyes. You still want me? I nearly broke right there. People think abandonment begins when somebody walks away. Sometimes it begins earlier, when a child is made to believe her presence is a burden. Children rarely blame the adults first. They blame themselves. That may be the cruelest part. Mia slowly leaned against my shoulder. Janet was still standing near the doorway. Your mother told us something very different. I asked to see it. She opened her phone. The messages had been sent before my shift ended. Mom had written that I had finally admitted I could not keep doing this. Another message said I was exhausted and Mia needed stability. Then I read the last one. If Natalie changes her mind when she gets emotional, don't hand Mia back immediately. Give her time to calm down. I felt cold. That was when I understood the trap. My mother had created a story where every possible reaction helped her. If I stayed calm, I must not care enough. If I got angry, I was unstable. Either way, she got to be the reasonable one. Janet still looked uncertain. I need to know Mia is safe. I did not argue. I showed her my phone. The unanswered calls to Ethan. The call to her. The timestamps. The pictures of Mia's stripped room. The studio plan. Michael studied everything quietly. Then he looked at Mia. Do you want to go with your mom? I stayed silent. Mia nodded. Then she wrapped both arms around me. Janet looked away. Then we were lied to, too. Outside, I buckled Mia into the car. My phone kept vibrating. Mom, Dad, Chelsea. Then a message appeared. Bring Mia home. We need to talk like a family. I stared at the word home. For the first time in my life, I did not think of that house when I heard it. If you are still listening, please leave a comment below and tell me how satisfied you are with the story so far. It lets me know there are still people walking beside me through this journey. Your presence means more than you may realize, and it gives me the encouragement to keep telling you what happened next. But before I could decide what home would look like for Mia and me, I had to make sure nobody could ever move her around like that again. I did not take Mia back to the house. We drove to a small hotel less than 10 minutes from her school. In the room was plain, with beige walls, 2 lamps, and a television we never turned on that night. Mia stood beside the bed holding her rabbit. Are we going back? I did not make a promise I could not keep. Not tonight. Then I sat beside her. Tonight you're staying with me. I put the rabbit on the pillow while she took a bath. I found grilled cheese and tomato soup from a place nearby because they were familiar, and familiar mattered more than healthy for one evening. I did not ask her to tell me the whole story again. Adults sometimes call repeated questioning getting the truth. To a child, it can feel like being made to relive the same frightening hour for everybody else's benefit. So I wrote down what Mia had already told me, using her words as closely as I could. Then I stopped. After she fell asleep, I opened my laptop. I created one folder. Inside it, I saved the pictures of her room, the studio plan, the receipt, my call log, the screenshots from Janet's phone, and the time I had arrived home. I added the time Janet confirmed Mia was with her. Then I made a timeline. Time, event, evidence, nothing else. Nursing had taught me that when something serious happens, you chart what happened, not what you hope somebody believes happened. The next morning, I called Mia's school. I updated the authorized pickup list and emergency contacts. I removed my parents and Chelsea. I asked the office to call me if Ethan appeared and to follow whatever policy and paperwork they already had on file. The woman in the office did not ask for drama. She asked for names, dates, and instructions. That helped. Then I scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney. For years, I had treated Ethan's absence like a custody arrangement. It was not. It was only absence. I wanted something clear now. Custody, parenting time, a record that Mia had been moved without my consent. For years, I had treated paperwork like something cold that families should not need. That week, I began to understand that boundaries written down are not a failure of love. Sometimes they are what protects love from people who refuse to respect it. At the consultation, the attorney asked one practical question. Do you have somewhere stable to stay? I thought about the house. Then about the old legal folder at the bottom of my bag. 3 people were still living in property they had just used to push my daughter out. The next morning, I carried every document I had into Daniel Price's office. Daniel Price did not react when I set the folder on his desk. He opened the recorded deed first, then the financing documents, the closing papers, and my payment history. I watched him read in silence. Part of me wanted him to look up and say something dramatic, something that would make the last few days feel simple. He did not. First, we do this correctly. That was the first thing he said. And then he explained what I could not do. I could not change the locks. I could not shut off utilities. I could not move anyone's belongings to the curb. I could not threaten them into leaving, and I should not get pulled into long arguments by text. Whatever happened next had to follow the proper local process. I nodded. Then Daniel looked at the deed again. Natalie, this isn't their house with your name on it. He paused. Legally, it's your house. I thought I would feel powerful hearing that. Instead, I felt sad. I could hear my mother's voice from years earlier. It's only on paper. Funny how paperwork becomes just paper when someone needs your signature, then becomes sacred the moment it protects you instead of them. But I also had to be honest with myself. I had not been tricked into signing something I did not understand. I understood enough. The harder truth was that I believed love would keep the legal reality from ever mattering. Daniel told me he would prepare the proper notice and handle the next steps. Then do it properly, I said. That was all. I did not want revenge. I wanted a clean line between what had happened and what was allowed to happen next. The notice was delivered soon after. My phone started lighting up almost immediately. Chelsea sent the first message. You're making mom and dad homeless over a bedroom. I did not answer. Then came another. You always hated me. A few minutes later, she sent one more. You planned this when you took the house. I stared at that message for a long time. Every accusation turned the consequences of her choices into proof of my cruelty. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries often experience your first boundary as cruelty. I thought the legal notice would make them understand that this had moved beyond a family argument. I was wrong. 2 days later, I was working when another nurse called me over. Natalie, security says your parents are downstairs. My mother was standing in the lobby holding the same papers Daniel had just sent, and from the way she was gripping them, she had not come to talk quietly. Security kept my parents in the main lobby, near the employee entrance. They never made it anywhere close to the patient floors. I went down because I wanted the conversation finished in a place with cameras, witnesses, and people whose job was to step in if things went too far. Dad was holding the legal notice. Mom looked furious. The second she saw me, she started talking. Dad cut in first. You used us to steal our house. Mom shook the papers at me. We trusted you. I did not defend myself. I did not explain what kind of daughter I had been. I just stayed with the facts. You were behind on the mortgage and taxes. Dad opened his mouth. I kept going. Your credit couldn't carry the refinance. Mom looked away. I put in roughly $24,000. Then I said the part they hated most. The loan became my responsibility. You asked me to sign. For a few seconds, neither of them had much to say. So Mom changed the subject. We were trying to help Mia. I looked at her. By telling her I didn't want her? Mom's face tightened. She misunderstood. She's 7. Mom answered immediately. Exactly. Children misunderstand things. That was the moment I knew there was not going to be an apology. An apology and an explanation can sound similar until you listen for responsibility. One says, I hurt you. The other says, you reacted badly to what I did. My mother was still blaming a child for understanding exactly what the adults around her had made her believe. Dad stepped closer. We're your parents. He said it like those 3 words were supposed to settle everything. I did not raise my voice. Then you should have acted like grandparents. He stopped. Mom stared at me. I continued. You don't have access to Mia anymore. Mom's voice rose. You can't erase family. I'm not erasing anyone. I'm setting a boundary. After that, they started talking over each other. I did not join them. I turned toward the security officer. I'm done. Security walked them toward the doors while Mom kept calling my name. I watched until they were outside. Then I stepped into the elevator. My hands were shaking. That surprised me. For years, I thought strength was the moment your hands stopped shaking. I know better now. Sometimes strength is doing the right thing while they shake. As the elevator doors closed, my phone buzzed. An email from Daniel. My parents and Chelsea had confirmed they would leave according to the legal deadline. I read the message twice. They were finally leaving, but the consequences were only beginning. Because once they no longer had my income, my credit, or my monthly help holding everything together, they were going to find out what their own choices actually cost. The house was quiet when I went back. By then, most of their things were gone. No raised voices, no final argument. Just empty rooms and the marks people leave behind after living somewhere a long time. I stood in Mia's room. The walls were bare, and one strip of blue painter's tape was still stuck near the baseboard. I peeled it off slowly. A few weeks earlier, that room had been treated like Mia was the thing that needed to be removed. Now I was closing the door on a place that no longer felt safe for her. Through a relative, I later heard that my parents had rented a smaller 2-bedroom apartment. Chelsea moved with them. Her studio became one corner of her bedroom. Their budget now had to work around pension income and what they could actually afford without me filling the gaps. I did not celebrate that. Consequences do not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes they look like a smaller apartment and the first budget you have had to follow in years. My life did not turn easy overnight either. The mortgage still existed. So did maintenance, insurance, taxes, and the other costs of owning a house. After some repairs, I hired a property manager and rented the place for about $2,850 a month. The rent covered most of the property costs and gave me some breathing room. Not freedom from work, freedom to choose work differently. I accepted a position at an outpatient clinic with a predictable schedule and fewer double shifts. I was still a nurse. I was still paying bills. Financial independence did not mean I never had to work again. It meant I finally had enough room to choose what kind of work fit the life I wanted. Mia was getting better, but not all at once. One night, she asked me, "If I'm loud, will we have to move again?" I sat beside her. No, kids are allowed to make noise in their own home. She nodded, but I knew the answer needed time to settle. A few days later, Janet sent me a message. She did not ask to see Mia. She did not remind me that they were her grandparents. She only wrote, "If and when she's ready, We'd like to earn back some trust. I read that sentence more than once, because for the first time in this whole mess, an adult seemed to understand something simple. Access to a child is not the same thing as entitlement to a child. Time did not fix everything. What it did was give people a chance to show me who they were. With Janet and Michael, we started small. First, a short phone call, then a visit at a public park where Mia could leave whenever she wanted. After that came lunch, then a few hours on a weekend. Janet always asked first, "Is this okay?" Michael always brought Mia back when he said he would. Neither of them criticized Ethan in front of her, or reminded me that they were family, as if that settled anything. They simply kept showing up. Trust is strange. People often talk about rebuilding it as if it were a conversation. In my experience, it is mostly a calendar. A promise after promise, being where you said you would be. One afternoon, I was making dinner when a car pulled into the driveway. Mia heard it before I did. She ran toward the front door. Not scared, not asking if she had to pack a bag. She only smiled and said, "Grandma Janet's here." I stood in the kitchen and watched her go. Mia knew who was coming. She knew why. And she knew I would still be there when she came back. Around that time, a relative asked whether enough time had passed for me to speak to my parents again. I said, time passing isn't the same thing as accountability. I had not resumed contact with Mom, Dad, or Chelsea. I did not swear that I never would. My answer was simpler. Not now. Not without accountability. For most of my life, I wanted my family to see me as the responsible daughter, the good mother, the person everyone could count on. I do not need that approval anymore. I used to think family was something you were born into and then spent your whole life preserving. Blood can explain how people are connected. It cannot guarantee how they will treat you. Family, at least to me now, is the person who respects your boundaries, protects your child, keeps their promises, and still shows up when there is nothing left to take from you. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is simply the space where you stop arguing long enough to see clearly. So tell me, were you satisfied with how this ended? Was I right to make my parents leave after what they did to Mia? Or do you believe I should have given them one more chance because they were still my family? And if you were standing in that hallway when your own mother said, "We voted, you don't get a say," what would you have done?